A word of warning, I heavily recommend that you play this game before watching this critique. A large part of the appeal is playing without any prior knowledge of its rule set, and you risk ruining the experience for you. There are very few things as pervasive as the us versus them mentality. Most armed conflicts can trace their origin to such a way of thinking, and the Balkans in Eastern Europe know the ravages caused by it all too well. This region is not a particularly happy one in the grand scheme of things. It's a place where dozens of groups held together by ethnicity and culture strive continuously for their independence, most of the time being held under the grip of a foreign empire or constantly being used in the political schemes of the great European powers. It's a place marked by fervent revolutions, violent oppression, and even the trigger for a world war that reshaped the borders on planet Earth. And perhaps the eye of the storm of this political powder keg is the city of Sarajevo. I don't have time to go through the entire history of this place, but it's safe to say that this city is no stranger to bloodshed. The most significant event of this type in recent memory being the Siege of Sarajevo from April 5, 1992 to February 29, 1996. It was a horrendous affair that has its origin in the death of Marshal Tito, a controversial figure that is seen as a benevolent dictator by some and an oppressive tyrant by others. But regardless of what people think of him, he was the central pillar which held Yugoslavia together, for better or for worse, depending on your perspective. You see, the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was made after World War II, and it was a political construct, but not a cultural one, held together by a war hero who had a measure of respect amongst all the different cultures and ethnicities. But after his death in 1980, it only took 10 years for all of it to come crumbling down and civil wars to ravage and divide everything. And it is in this depressing zeitgeist that the game This War of Mine takes place. This War of Mine is a 2D survival game with light management elements, light stealth elements, and light combat elements. Its aesthetic is quite reminiscent of the zombie side-scroller Deadlight, while its visual cues have a lot in common with the stealth side-scroller Mark of the Ninja. Now, I want to say, I was quite excited when This War of Mine was announced. I had very high hopes and expectations for a game that was trying to tackle such a tough subject matter, but that also means that I have to be fair with it, no matter how much I tried to like it from the onset. If it's a recommendation you are looking for, then buy it. It is a good game that aims high, that also sadly fails to achieve what it properly wanted to do because of some misguided game design, but even so, it's still worth your time. Let's start with the things I really liked. The visual design and world building is spot on. The destroyed fictional stand-in for Sarajevo, Pogoren, captures the mood of a modern city under siege very well. The dilapidated houses, the sounds of gunfire in the distance, the low-key music, it's top-notch. Now, to be fair, it does owe a lot to the multitude of zombie games out there, since they also try to portray urban decay as realistically as possible, but even so, This War of Mine can really get you in the mood with its aesthetic and sound design. On a smaller note, I really appreciate the use of real photography to represent the people living in Pogoren. It's a very subtle way of making the survivors seem more human. Another thing that needs to be mentioned is how effective the hand-drawn filter is. It gives the whole situation an oneiric feeling, like something this bad cannot possibly be happening and that the next day everything will go away, which is very much in line with the theme of waiting for the war to end. Now, the animations are a little bit of a mixed bag. They are generally well done, but combat needs a little more work. They feel too mechanical and well executed for a bunch of civilians. This is especially evident with melee attacks that are much too brutally efficient in my opinion. There are also a few context sensitive moments that are immersion breaking, like the fact that the survivors always crouch when out scavenging, even when they are in populated zones like the market. It's quite out of place when you see normal people chatting and you are creeping next to them. Another example is the fact that you have this hole in your bathroom where your medicine is stashed, and when you send someone to take pills or to bandage themselves, it's quite possible that they will climb and pull themselves up by their own weight, which led to almost comical situations like a bleeding middle-aged lady on her deathbed doing this physically tasking action instead of taking the stairs. The last thing I'll mention here is that they could have done a better job of showing which foreground objects can be interacted with. There are certain spots where your survivor can climb a ledge or some such, but it's not particularly clear if that is the case, or if you want an UI example, the fact that a radio dial can be interacted with isn't clearly represented. I am willing to bet a lot of people ignored it due to it not popping out in any way. By the way, you know what an easy fix for this would be? Simply make it so that when the radio is built, it is not on a stable frequency. This will incentivize the player to figure it out faster. But anyway, now comes the part where I have to be harsher, mainly the blending between context and gameplay. You see, the interactive medium has been going through a lot of growing pains lately. lately, arguments about what is and what is not a game combined with some very heated debates about the social responsibility of gaming. Video games are relatively new in the cultural landscape, and it's clear to see that they struggle with certain type of scenarios. How do you systemize a tragedy, for example? How do you make such a situation compelling through gameplay but at the same time retain its emotional impact? Well, the answer for the longest time was that you don't even bother. Most of the times designers just relegated the meaningful bits to cutscenes while keeping gameplay as an entirely separate entity, trying to invoke feeling through cinematic techniques rather than ludic ones. But that's changed as of late. Games are starting to invoke inherent emotional value through their systems more and more, and this War of Mine is one of those games. It's just a shame that it falls below achieving its admittedly very high target. First things first, the game is divided into two main gameplay loops: the day where you improve your house so the survivors can be more efficient/comfortable, and the night where one of your people is sent out to scavenge specific locations that may or may have not been unlocked yet, while the others go to sleep or remain on watch for possible attacks by looters. It's quite simple and effective, which doesn't surprise me since I played Anomaly by 11-bit Studios, and they seem to develop strategy games which have a great focus on making simple actions as meaningful as possible. The interface reflects this design philosophy well. You select a survivor, then click on a contextually interactive item. That's it. The only small note being that when scavenging, you need to select what weapon you are using from a list on the left side of the screen. This rudimentary interface really does allow the atmosphere of the setting to seep in. It's very easy to ignore the overtly gamey parts while you are out skulking in the shadows looking for resources. And I'm happy to say that for the first 4 hours, the first 20 days of my session, this game got me. It really did give me an emotional reaction as I stumbled across this ruined city, trying to fight off starvation, disease, and bodily harm. And I think one of the big reasons for this is its lack of a tutorial. The game just drops you off in the action and lets you figure things out by yourself. And this works because of the simple interface used. You are not struggling to interact with the game, but rather you are struggling to know the game. It's a subtle difference and a welcome one at that. But like I said, that only lasted for the first 4 hours. What happened? Well, there are three main things that sort of tie into one another, so let's take them one by one. First off, the game muddles its message by inserting black and white morality in a setting that's trying very hard to be exactly not about that. It's a game about asking the player how far you are willing to go when pushed to the limit. Will you steal from the elderly to keep yourself fed one more day, or will you kill other survivors to get bandages for your dying friend? Of course, there is the possibility that you go down the psychopath route, but the game actively discourages this because for every murder and theft that affects an innocent person, the mental health of your survivor degrades, which ultimately can lead to suicide. There is a huge issue here though, and the issue is the word I used the sentence before, namely innocent. You see, the war-torn city of Pogoren is home to survivors, soldiers, rebels, and monsters. No, not the horned and sharp teeth kind, but rather the Homo sapiens kind. You will encounter rapists, pedophiles, and murderous psychopaths that do not register as negative effects upon your sanity when you go into their homes and murder them while stealing everything that isn't nailed down. The consistent presence of these irredeemably bad people in a game about the value of human life and war is just jarring. I mean, in some cases the survivors do ask themselves if they're doing the right thing, but in others they are overjoyed. Take the rape scenario for example. You encounter a soldier that is harassing a woman in a supermarket. It becomes increasingly clear that he intends to rape her, so the player can choose to intervene, killing the soldier and letting the girl escape. The problem with this though is that when you return home, people are smiling at your action, being energized and made content by the fact that you caved somebody's skull in with a crowbar. This is made even more complex due to the fact that in the ending photo sequence, it's revealed that the soldier was drunk. Sure, he could have been a monster, but he could have also been someone intoxicated suffering from PTSD that was about to do a very bad thing. Which doesn't mean that he shouldn't have been stopped, but the attitude of the survivors is highly questionable. I mean, they're basically saying, what's the fundamental moral here? If you're in a bad situation, feel free to start killing the bad people to take their stuff? I mean, look at this. You can stalk and kill in the most cold-blooded of ways, and the game says that you're a good person for it. My point is that these purely malevolent people contrast with the moral tone of the story, especially since a sanity system is involved, and thus the game is automatically passing judgment based on this sanity system. Now onto the second issue of this War of Mine. It's only compelling when you are under pressure. I've played 2 sessions of this game and I won both of them. I probably will play a third one, but I need some self-imposed challenges to make it interesting. You see, the issue isn't that the game isn't hard. The issue is that the game is boring if you are winning. There isn't a whole lot to do when you are in good shape, especially during the day. You rotate the people on the previous night's watch in bed so they stop being tired, you feed everyone, you put the water filter, and you wait past 1 PM to see if anyone comes at your door. Then you sit and wait, or just directly end the day like I did in most cases. This is in stark contrast to when you have dire needs. You have to consciously try to remember which location had the thing you need while deliberating if you need another bed to house your exhausted people, all the while hoping that the herbs your sick survivor took actually helped. Time flies by when you are focused on issues. There is even this little Sims-like system where your survivors can administer medicine or talk between themselves, but that only shows up when things are going badly. This might be an unique example, but the better you are at this War of Mine, the less interesting it becomes. There are some balance issues here and there, like the fact that bandages and pills are hyper valuable items, but if you play defensively continuously to avoid disease and injury while fortifying your house, you can essentially snowball through the entire game. Those things trade for a lot. But like I said, it's more about the pacing rather than the difficulty. For example, there are 3 negative events that will happen to the city that are each tied to a specific radio channel, but they don't cover the entire session length. There is this 8 to 10 turn gap before the war ends where nothing really happens. Every location is open again and you are mostly biding your time without the pressure of winter or crime waves. And all of these tie into the third issue of this War of Mine, which is the fact that the fundamental game design vision is not in tune with the situation that the game wants to portray. In the last year there have been many games focused on survival, mostly tied to the zombie genre, and they generally focused on a specific vision of survival, mainly thrive. Games like Don't Starve or DayZ have the same basic layout from their survival perspective. You start with an empty inventory in a harsh land, and by using the environment around you, or killing other players, you gain the necessary tools to thrive. This War of Mine sadly attempts something similar, where you start in a bad situation and your goal is to reach the end of the war, but in the meantime you can actually get better and thrive. In my opinion, the best situations you should have gotten were cutting even, not getting significantly better. I think degradation would have been a much better design vision, and to give some practical examples, I'm going to go to board games. Pro tip, if you have any interest in game design, I thoroughly suggest you play a lot of board games. There is so much they can teach you. Now then, the 2 examples I want to give are Battlestar Galactica and Arkham Horror. Battlestar Galactica has you and a group of other people, some of which are betrayers, run a ship that only has a limited number of resources which are continuously dwindling while you try to reach Earth. Each turn, an event card being drawn in which usually a small or large amount of resources are lost depending on your actions. Arkham Horror, on the other hand, puts you and your friends in the role of investigators that must seal up portals in the city of Arkham to prevent an ancient cosmic deity from awakening and destroying everything. Now, both these games feature degradation and a time limit of some sort. Battlestar starts you off with a ship full of resources that gets depleted fast, while Arkham starts with a clean board that quickly starts getting filled with all sorts of monstrosities. Both try to simulate a race against the clock where things are getting continuously worse. This War of Mine sadly lacks this vision. It has the time limit concept right, but really things are kinda static with the exception of the 3 negative events. I think the message of this game would have been much more powerful if, for example, the house you shelter yourself in would start relatively undamaged, but through the subsequent artillery strikes, it and the background would start becoming more and more dilapidated. Or, another example, you could start with a neighborhood water well location that would provide a little bucket with some clean water each morning. You could go there to talk to people and trade, but further along in the session it would get bombed or raided, so the water buckets wouldn't come anymore, thus making water a much more valuable commodity for you. Fundamentally, my point is this: I believe that the game design vision based on degradation would have much better represented the horror of a modern siege rather than the popular survival game design vision of struggling to thrive. By the way, before I finish this up, I want to make a little side note. I hate achievements, but I especially hate achievements that require you to fail. After finishing my second session, I looked at the list of missing achievements out of morbid curiosity, and apparently I was missing 2 that required you to be injured and then heal yourself. State of Decay pulled this exact same thing. Can someone explain to me how getting into a negative state of the game is in any way an accomplishment? It's ridiculous. Anyway, to wrap this all up, for how harsh I am with the game, in the end, it's tough love. The simple fact that this game exists is a landmark in and of itself. Those first few hours where I was afraid of opening the door due to not knowing what could happen, where I got into an accidental fight that cost me the life of a survivor, where I had to trade most of my stuff for food, where I stole out of desperation from an old couple that committed suicide after my theft. Those few hours really engaged me. It was a unique experience. It's just too bad that the game's lack of a consistent mechanical identity and its unbalanced moral view kept it from going all the way. You know, thinking about it, it would be kind of weird and out of place to expect an expansion pack for this sort of game. What would they call it? This War of Mine. Tears for Bullets, now with 120% more tragedy. I mean, most emotionally exhausting war movies don't really have sequels due to their compact experiences. But even so, I hope that 8-Bit Studios manages to stay afloat, since I heard that they have some financial trouble, and a company that aims this high with a game, even if it doesn't fully hit the mark, deserves to stay open.